an Ava Duvernay film. We know
Yep.
Ava Duvernay is super talented. Um,
Yes.
Star of the movie is Anjanou Ellis Taylor.
Yama.
Yeah, so I always love seeing her. I think she's super talented, so I was really excited about seeing her in this film.
Hmm.
Um, Blair Underwood makes an appearance,
He did. I didn't expect that. I was like, oh, look at
and
Blair.
yeah,
Blair is there.
Blair was there. Um, Niecy Nash was in it.
Yeah, that was a good surprise. She definitely brought a lot of flavor.
Audra McDonald was in it.
I
I'm
don't know
sure
who
I'm.
that is.
She played the woman that she interviewed.
Oh, Miss.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. So it was a very interesting cast, very
You somehow
talented
forgot
cast.
everyone except the white man.
I don't know his name.
Excuse me, you
I've got
somehow
to be.
said everyone except the white man. His name
I
is
gotta be honest.
John. Hold on. I got the
I didn't
cast
for,
pulled up right here.
I didn't forget him. I just didn't know that man's name, so I didn't want to.
John Bernthal,
Yep, he was in it.
the guy who
I
played the
just didn't.
Punisher.
I just
That's
didn't
what
know his
he's like
name.
famous for recently.
Right, but now I recognize him. You were talking about him before, and now I'm like, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
I know that guy. So,
All right. Well, wait. Why did we take off to go see this movie? Let's address it.
okay, so it was a limited run from the beginning. It
Right.
wasn't showing in all theaters, and usually when that happens, it's also happening at inconvenient times or days.
Yep.
So, and and as I'm sure most people know, anything that's in theaters, as time goes by, it whittles the times and days whittle down anyway.
Right.
So we had tried to see the film before,
Yep.
and it just
Convenient.
never really worked out. It was never a convenient day and time.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden they're like, hey, because I guess a lot of people were saying that they wanted to see it, but they just couldn't. They either wasn't in an area where they could see it, or it just wasn't in theaters anymore. And so they decided to do a final showing on February 28th,
Right.
um, all theaters, and so people could go and see it one last time before they
Yep.
took it out of the theaters.
Yeah. So it was a one
So
day only movie event.
yeah. So, we were like, hey, why not? We talked about this before. We should definitely try to see it. Um, Normally we would faithfully I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Normally we would faithfully I'm sorry. I just had a random thought about something and it just completely took my mind away. But we would make sure that we give the people what they need and get their weeknights episode. But
Right.
this was an extenuating circumstance, so we went ahead and canceled the pod so we could go see it.
Yeah, we both wanted to see the movie, like you said. It was this one night only event,
Hmm.
and we had a pod meeting, and we
Yeah,
decided time for a pod field trip.
we decided as a pod squad that we
Oh
should.
man, don't say that again. A pod squad.
They actually call us that at work, which is really funny. But anyway, so we decided we decided that we should go see this film, and I'm glad we did. It was really interesting.
Okay.
I I didn't know I didn't know exactly how it was going to come together. Um And I know this is based on a book. This is based on a book that was written by Isabel Wilkerson.
Yep.
Isabel Wilkerson is a real person. So it's about her. Um,
And her journey
what
putting this book together.
and her journey putting the book together, which is a really like tragic journey.
Yep.
Um, Spoiler alert. Um, she dealt with a lot of tragedy before she even got started writing the book.
Yeah, I would say the
Um,
tragedy inspired the book.
yes, I think in a lot of ways the tragedies inspired inspired the book, and kind of motivated her to keep the book going too. Like the third time around, the third loss that she experienced, it's like I think at that point she was like, okay, I have to push forward, and she kind of says it at some point in the film.
She said to her
Um,
editor, her editor said, "You're going to make the deadline, the self-imposed deadline." And she said, "Yeah, no one is, no, what she said? No one's left around to push me, so I have to push myself."
I have to push myself, and that broke my heart. But also, I was like, I'm so glad that she pushed through that because I feel like when you experience loss, you're also trying to you're looking for something to grab hold onto. So
Hmm.
understood the mechanism and how that kind of worked in her mind. But yeah, I didn't expect the story that was around it. But I'm glad that it kind of gave it shape. I think if it was just about the book she was writing, it would probably be a little bit too serious, or it was all serious, but maybe too sterile. Like it needed some color, and I think that her story added to that. So I appreciated that. I thought it was a little long. Um,
It just dragged. It was a
yeah,
little under, it was a little under 2 hours.
yeah. I felt like it kind of it kind of did drag on, and um I know that stories like that you have to be careful with the way that you tell it. You don't want to rush through it, but um yeah, I felt like it was a little bit long. But overall, I felt like it was a great story.
Hmm.
I might have even wanted to see this like on television. I know that Ava DuVernay is like really excited that it made it to theaters, and I'm happy for her as a director. I think that's great. It's a great accomplishment whenever your work makes it to film and it makes it to theaters. But I do think that I probably would have preferred to watch this as like a four-part series. Um, you know, I don't know, on OWN or something, which is where it would have probably landed if it didn't make it to theaters. But that would have been my only thing. I thought it was a good story. I just felt like yeah, it was a bit long for me, and like you said, it dragged on. But as far as the connections that were made between the different cultures, I thought that was really smart. And I know that's not necessarily Ava DuVernay's doing, that's Isabel Wilkerson's doing, but I just think that's really smart. It made me want to read the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
The movie was really sad. Let's start there. Um, excuse me. I had no idea this was going to be this sad or this deep. Um, I mean, I guess going in, we knew a little bit about the depth, but
Hmm.
I didn't know it was going to be deep like this.
Yeah.
It was both about history and systems and defining racism, which is kind of how all of that started. Spoiler
Yeah.
alert. The journey kind
Or,
of starts with a conversation about the differences and the nuances in racism and how racism is kind of this blanket statement. And she's like, I got to learn more. And,
yeah.
you know, I really like that this was so deep, but it did also make it kind of painful to watch in a sense,
Oh, it was hard to
because
watch at times.
they are reliving all of these tragic moments throughout different history. historical events and different people's lived experience, so kind of their personal histories.
Mhm.
um, it was a really good film. I think they did a great job of balancing all the things that were going on. Obviously, it
Mhm.
was very serious and very sad, but there was also humor. There was also humility. Um, Even the scene where you see dude showing up with the MAGA hat and being a dick to her because she's a black woman, she finds a way to kind of humanize him and give them some relatability. And you see how that
Mhm.
changes things. In that moment, he sees another person struggling, not a black woman who he's against.
Yeah.
Um, and so they did a really good job of balancing all of these things. And also, I think a really good job of putting you in different perspectives each time that they change
Mhm.
uh, the story from the focal point. They did a really good job of kind of putting you in the in the lens of that person,
Mhm.
right? Where like when the little boy goes through what he goes through, it's kind of like I'm seeing things through the lens of the little boy. It's almost like you're the little boy at that point as the viewer.
Yeah. 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 And she speaks
um,
about that at the end. At the
well,
end,
we
there's
we
like a
saw
little
the Q&A, yeah.
yeah, there's a little Q&A, and she speaks about how important it was for her to play with um different
Filming
camera
styles.
styles. And yeah, so and you're absolutely right. When the little boy is experiencing what he's experiencing towards the end of the film, yeah, you feel like you are there. You feel like you are actually a part of what's happening, and
Yeah.
it's really cool and also really jarring because it was not a it was not a pleasant moment.
Right. Well, they did. That's what I'm saying. I think they did a great job of doing that throughout the film because at one point you see someone's child get taken away, and the way it happens, same thing. It's almost like your child is getting taken away as you're sitting there. You see things through their
Hmm.
lens, and when they're showing the Nazis burning all the books, it's like no, it almost the way that they did it. It's almost like you're watching your heritage get burned away. Um, so it's really interesting the way they did it. I think they did a great job of showing us nuance, showing
Hmm.
us how things have been twisted throughout history. Um, and even though we saw all of that, the narration of the pillars towards the end was a pivotal moment.
Hmm.
And I love the way that they broke that down because they did exactly what the cousin's character was saying, which is you have to be able to break down this really crazy concept, this concept that is being broken down by PhDs and by
Hmm.
historical uh, literary masters
Yeah.
in simple terms so people can understand it that
Hmm.
don't have any of those things.
Right.
And so I thought all of that was really good, really sad movie,
Yeah.
but really deep movie. I would put this on the must watch list. I think more people need to see this movie. Hopefully,
Yeah.
this, our little podcast helps bring a spotlight to it.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely something that I think more people need to know about, more people need to see, because more people need to understand the caste system, which is really what all of this is about. Um, and which is the name of the book, right? It's called
Hmm.
Caste: The Origins of Our Descent, or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, that's what the book comes from. It says it in the film, and even in the trailer. If y'all go look up Origin movie trailer, it says it in the
Yeah.
trailer. But
Yeah. And the author is
um,
Isabel Wilkerson.
yep. So
Um,
and what's interesting too is this is not even her first book. This is her second book. She won
just a
a
second.
Pulitzer Prize for her first one, and so that's really interesting. Um, and she comes from a journalistic background. In the movie, I think it was the New York Times she used to write for.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's really interesting to see how her life events and the Trayvon Martin case kind of sparked all of this
And the book was released, I believe.
in 2020.
It was released in 2020. It was either several months before the George Floyd killing or a few months after, but it was in close
It was right before,
proximity.
yeah.
So we all know what the year of our Lord 2020 was like, in a lot of different ways, but um, it's such important work uh, that the fact that it came out that year just um, and it did so well, I'm sure has to do with how charged everyone was in 2020. Um, but thinking back to how that year went, and I'm talking less about the pandemic and more about just social relations that were coming to a head during that year.
Hmm.
It was such an important piece of work to come out when it did. Um, and like I said, I'm very curious about the book and will probably purchase the book, um, because one, I just feel like the concepts, being able to, you know me, I'm always fascinated by people who can string concepts that you don't necessarily put together, people who are able to string them together and make sense of why they're connected.
Right.
I always fascinated by that. And I always want to learn more about that. I just think that it takes a really good storyteller to be able to do something like that. And you know, if I'm being honest, I'm always looking to be a better storyteller. So that to me was pretty incredible that she was able to think of all these things and um, the fact that the Trayvon Martin case. So, like you said, it was things that happened in the past that you know she was reckoning with, but also things that were very current. Because Trayvon Martin had just happened when she first kind of starts to think about what does all of this mean,
Right.
and she starts to question what is racism and what is it not.
Right.
And I think that's something that we don't really, we just kind of, like you said, it's this blanket thing that we know and we understand on a high level, but we don't, many of us who are not scholars don't necessarily get into the weeds about how deep it runs or how much intersectionality there is when it comes to racism.
Right.
Um, so I don't know. I'm rambling, but I just think she has such a smart, brilliant mind to be able to even ask these questions and put it into words for people to read. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, but it is a sad film, and I will say, I think everybody should watch it, but I also think everybody should be mindful that uh, definitely a trigger warning on this film if
Yeah.
you are sensitive about, um, you know, I think we all know the Trayvon Martin case very
Hmm.
well as far as what happened. If things like that trigger you, you got to be prepared for that. Um, if things that happened in the slave trade and transporting slaves, um, this is a very something that this film had a lot of layers, and one of the layers to it was it visually depicted these things.
Yeah.
It did not shy away from showing you exactly what happened. She talks about the untouchables in India. You see how they worked and what they did to protect their skin, and so all of that is very well. You, I had a visceral reaction to
Yeah. It's done on purpose.
right. So you know, just I just want to put it out there because I do want to encourage people to go see it, but I also I understand that some people are sensitive to those things. There were moments where I had to look away because I was just like, okay, this is a lot. Um, but you know, everybody's not as squeamish as me. So, um,
Gotcha.
but yeah, I thought it was great.
Agreed.